I had always known my HOA was a pain, but I never thought they would be bold or stupid enough to steal from me. It started like any other day. I grabbed my morning coffee, stepped outside to check on my boat, and immediately froze. The space where my vessel had been parked was empty. For a moment, I thought I was still half asleep. My boat, a fully operational, well-maintained, and legally registered vessel, was gone. No note, no warning, nothing. My stomach dropped as I scanned the area, looking for any signs of what had happened. It wasn't just a misplaced vehicle. Boats don't just vanish overnight. Someone had taken it. Still trying to process the situation, I checked my security cameras. That's when I saw her. A tow truck had backed up to my property in the middle of the night, and standing right beside it, giving orders like a wannabe general, was none other than Karen, the HOA president, self-proclaimed enforcer of the community, and all-around menace. She wasn't just watching, she was directing the tow driver, pointing at my boat like she owned it. My blood boiled. I had dealt with her nitpicking before, passive-aggressive letters about my lawn, complaints about my trash cans being an inch out of place, but this was a whole new level of insanity. She had taken my property without my permission, under the assumption that she had the authority to do so. I immediately grabbed my phone and started making calls. First, I reached out to my local towing companies, hoping to track down where my boat had been taken. After some pushback, I finally got an answer. Karen had arranged for my boat to be moved to an impound lot. But here's the kicker. It wasn't even a proper storage facility for marine vessels. It was a junkyard used for abandoned cars. My expensive, carefully maintained boat was sitting in a place where it could easily be damaged, stripped, or worse. My hands clenched around my phone as I listened to the lot attendant explain that I needed authorization from the party that had requested the tow before I could retrieve it. That meant I needed permission from Karen, permission to take back what was already mine. At this point, my anger turned to something more dangerous, cold, calculated determination. Because here's what Karen didn't know. I wasn't just some random boat owner. I was in the Coast Guard. I had spent years dealing with maritime law, vessel regulations, and property rights. Karen had just stepped into a legal minefield, and she had no idea. The moment she decided to play dictator over something she didn't understand, she had made a massive mistake, and I was going to make sure she regretted it. I didn't storm into the HOA office immediately. No, I was smarter than that. Instead, I did my homework. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, reviewed every single rule about vehicle storage, and confirmed, without a doubt, that I had not violated any regulations. My boat had been parked legally. There were no new policies about boats, no warnings, nothing that justified its removal. That meant Karen hadn't just overstepped her authority, she had broken the law. If she thought she could intimidate me like she had done to other residents, she was about to have a very, very bad day. Once I had everything I needed, I walked into the HOA office, calm but firm. Karen was there, sitting behind her desk with that smug, self-important look she always had. She barely glanced at me before saying, "I assume you're here about the boat." I kept my expression neutral. "Yes, I am. You had no right to take it." She leaned back in her chair, waving her hand dismissively. "Boats are an eyesore. The board agreed they shouldn't be stored in driveways." I raised an eyebrow. "That's funny, because I just read the HOA bylaws and there's no such rule." For the first time, Karen hesitated. It was subtle, but I caught it. She wasn't expecting pushback from someone who actually knew their rights. I pressed on. "Not only did you have no authority to tow my boat, but you also failed to follow any legal procedures. No notice, no warnings, nothing. That's not just an HOA violation, it's illegal." She scoffed. "Oh, come on. Are you seriously trying to make a big deal out of this? Just pay the impound fee and move on." That's when I smiled, the kind of smile that makes people nervous. "Oh, I'm not paying a single cent. In fact, the impound lot has already confirmed that your name is on the request order, which means you're personally liable for any damages my boat suffered. And since I happen to know a thing or two about maritime property laws, I can tell you right now that what you did could be considered unlawful seizure. Karen's face paled. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The confidence was slipping, and I wasn't done yet. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the HOA board, and if my boat isn't returned in the exact condition it was taken, I'll be escalating this legally. You overstepped, Karen, and now you're going to be held accountable. For the first time, I saw actual fear in her eyes. She had been so used to bullying homeowners into submission that she never considered what would happen if she messed with the wrong person. And unfortunately for her, she had picked the absolute worst person to steal from. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen had made a fatal mistake. She thought this was just another petty HOA dispute. What she didn't realize was that she had stepped into legal territory far beyond her pay grade, and now I was going to make sure she faced the consequences. After leaving the HOA office, I wasted no time. I documented everything. I took screenshots of my security footage showing Karen overseeing the tow, saved all my correspondence with the HOA, and even recorded my phone call with the impound lot where they confirmed she had authorized the removal. Then I contacted a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. He was more than happy to take the case, especially when I mentioned that my boat had been moved without notice against established HOA policies and was now being held ransom by someone with no legal authority to do so. This is textbook unlawful seizure, he told me. She's playing with fire. But before taking legal action, I had another card to play. Since I was in the Coast Guard, I had direct knowledge of maritime law. Karen hadn't just had a random vehicle towed, she had taken possession of a watercraft. That changed everything. Boats are subject to a different set of property laws than cars, and in many places, illegally towing or impounding a registered vessel can be considered a form of grand theft. That's when I made my next move. I contacted local law enforcement. At first, the officer I spoke to seemed hesitant. HOA disputes aren't usually criminal matters, he said. I responded calmly. I understand, but this isn't just an HOA issue. This is an unauthorized seizure of a registered vessel, ordered by someone with no legal authority. I can provide evidence that my boat was legally stored, that I received no notice, and that it was taken against all proper procedures. I also have reason to believe it has been damaged in the process. That caught his attention. Wait, you're saying an HOA president personally arranged for a boat to be towed? Yes, I confirmed, without any legal justification, and she placed it in an impound lot that isn't designed for boats, exposing it to damage. He sighed. All right, that sounds more serious. Let's get an officer to meet you at the impound lot. That was exactly what I wanted. I arrived at the impound lot a few minutes before the officer. The lot attendant, the same one I had spoken to earlier, looked nervous when I walked up. Look, man, I don't want any trouble, he said. We just got the order to tow it. You're not the one in trouble, I assured him. But I need to inspect my boat. He hesitated, but finally nodded. Fine, just don't touch anything until the officer gets here. When I saw my boat, my heart sank. It had clearly been mishandled. The hull had visible scratches, the ropes securing it were loose, and dirt and grime had built up from being stored improperly. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience anymore. This was property damage. I took out my phone and documented everything, making sure to get clear evidence of the condition. Just as I finished, a police cruiser pulled into the lot. The officer stepped out, gave me a nod, and took a look at my boat. So, this is the vessel in question. I handed him my documentation. Yes, here's proof that I legally own it, that it was stored in compliance with HOA rules, and that it was removed without my consent. He flipped through the paperwork and nodded. And the person who ordered the tow, she's not law enforcement or a government official. Number just an HOA president who thinks she has more power than she actually does. That was all he needed to hear. All right, I'm going to make a call. I waited as he stepped aside, speaking into his radio. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught snippets. Words like unauthorized removal, property damage, and potential legal violation made it clear this was being taken seriously. When he returned, his expression was firm. We're treating this as a civil dispute for now, but based on what you've shown me, there's a strong case for unlawful seizure. Would you like to press charges? I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. That was the moment everything changed. Up until now, Karen had been operating under the assumption that she was untouchable, but she had just crossed into a world where her authority meant nothing. The officer took an official statement from me and advised that I take the case to small claims court for damages. He also mentioned that law enforcement would be reaching out to Karen for an explanation. I almost wished I could be there to see the look on her face when she realized the police were involved, but I wasn't done yet. Now that I had legal backing, I contacted the HOA board directly. I sent an official demand letter stating that Karen had acted outside of her authority, that my boat had been damaged as a result, and that if the HOA did not immediately rectify the situation, I would be taking legal action against both her and the organization. The response was almost instant. The HOA board, clearly caught off guard, responded with concern, asking for a discussion before things escalated. It was clear they were already distancing themselves from Karen, realizing that she had put them in a potentially costly legal mess. That was exactly what I wanted. Karen had gone from being an untouchable HOA tyrant to someone who was now under police scrutiny and facing potential civil action. And the best part? She had done it all to herself. This wasn't over yet, but for the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. She wasn't in control anymore. I was. Karen had ruled the HOA with an iron fist for years, bullying homeowners into submission with arbitrary rules, threats of fines, and outright abuse of authority. But now she had finally pushed too far. My decision to press charges wasn't just about my boat, it was about setting a precedent. It was about showing Karen and the rest of the HOA board that their unchecked power wasn't absolute. And as I watched the situation unravel, it became clear that this wasn't just going to be a small legal dispute. This was going to be the downfall of Karen's reign over the neighborhood. With the police now involved and my lawyer preparing for a civil case, I began hearing murmurs from my neighbors. It started with a few casual conversations, people stopping me as I walked my dog, asking about the situation. But soon it turned into something much bigger. It turned out I wasn't the only one Karen had targeted. She fined me for having the wrong shade of blue on my shutters, one neighbor confessed, shaking his head, told me it clashed with the community aesthetic, even though there's no rule about shutter colors. She threatened to tow my husband's truck, another said, claimed it was an unauthorized commercial vehicle. It's a personal truck, completely within the size limits, and it's always parked in our driveway. The more people I talked to, the clearer it became. Karen had been running the HOA like her personal kingdom, making up rules whenever it suited her. My case had given people the confidence to speak up, and as word spread that I had taken legal action, more and more homeowners started coming forward with their own horror stories. It didn't take long for the HOA board to realize they had a serious problem on their hands. Up until now, they had been content to let Karen do as she pleased. She handled the dirty work while they sat back and collected HOA dues. But now, with police involvement and multiple homeowners beginning to question her authority, they saw the writing on the wall. If they didn't act fast, the entire HOA could face a lawsuit, not just Karen. A few days later, I received an email from the board requesting an emergency HOA meeting. The tone was different this time. It wasn't an order, it was practically a plea. They wanted to discuss the resolution of the recent dispute and work towards an amicable solution. Translation, they knew they were in trouble, and they were scrambling for damage control. I agreed to attend the meeting, but I wasn't going in alone. By now, I had gathered support from several neighbors who had been wronged by Karen, and they were more than willing to stand with me. This wasn't just about my boat anymore. It was about exposing the corruption that had plagued the HOA for years. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a space Karen had always reserved for her own self-aggrandizing HOA updates, where she lorded her power over everyone. But this time, the atmosphere was different. The room was packed, not just with board members, but with homeowners, people who had come to witness what was about to happen. And for the first time, Karen looked nervous. She tried to regain control right away, clearing her throat and addressing the room with forced authority. "We're here today to settle a misunderstanding." I cut her off. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. You stole my boat." The room murmured in agreement, and Karen's eyes darted around as she realized she no longer had the board's unquestioned support. She stammered, "I was enforcing community standards." I held up a copy of the HOA bylaws. "Then show me where it says you had the authority to tow a legally parked boat." Silence. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. "Karen, is there an actual rule about this?" She hesitated, then mumbled, "It's an unspoken rule." That was the moment her control shattered. Another homeowner stood up. "So you've just been making up rules whenever you feel like it?" More voices chimed in. People were fed up, and now that Karen was finally being challenged, the floodgates opened. Neighbor after neighbor started speaking up about the arbitrary fines, the threats, the overreach. The board members, who had been complicit in Karen's reign of terror, looked increasingly uncomfortable as they realized just how unpopular she had become. The meeting turned into a full-on interrogation. "Why did you fine me for a lawn ornament that wasn't against any rules? Why did you reject my request to build a shed even though other homes have them? Why did you demand I repaint my door when it was already an approved color?" Karen was visibly sweating now. She had spent years ruling through intimidation, but now that the community was pushing back, she had no defense. Then I played my final card. I pulled out the police report. "Since you had my boat removed without authorization, causing potential legal damages, I've pressed charges for unlawful seizure of property." The entire room went silent. Even the board members looked shocked. One of them turned to Karen, voice low. "You told us this was a simple enforcement issue." Karen was floundering. I was just trying to maintain community standards." The board president, a man who had mostly stayed quiet up until now, sighed. "Karen, we can't protect you from this. If you acted outside of HOA authority, you're personally liable." Her eyes widened in pure panic. "No, I was acting for the HOA." I shook my head. "No, you weren't. The impound lot confirmed that you ordered the tow personally. That means you're the one who has to answer for it." And that was it. The board turned on her instantly. Within minutes, they had called for a vote of no confidence. The result? Unanimous. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president on the spot. She tried to protest, sputtering about unfair treatment, but no one was listening anymore. She had lost all power. But I wasn't finished yet. I turned to the board and said, "Now let's talk about compensation." They knew they had no choice. To avoid an even bigger legal battle, the HOA agreed to not only cover the impound fees, but also pay for any damages my boat had sustained. Additionally, new rules were put in place to prevent any single board member from making unilateral decisions without homeowner approval. Karen, now stripped of her position and facing a lawsuit, stormed out of the meeting, but no one followed her. She was no longer the queen of the HOA. She was just another homeowner, one who had burned every bridge she had. After the meeting, neighbors approached me, thanking me for standing up to her. Many admitted that they had felt powerless for years but had been too afraid to fight back. Now, with Karen gone and the HOA forced to operate with transparency, things were finally changing. I got my boat back. But more importantly, I had set a precedent. HOAs exist to serve their communities, not to rule over them. And as for Karen, well, rumor has it she put her house up for sale a few months later. I guess she realized that without her self-imposed authority, she didn't have much of a reason to stay. Good riddance. With Karen officially removed from her position as HOA president, you'd think the story would have ended there. But while she had lost her title, she hadn't yet faced the full consequences of her actions. And I wasn't about to let her walk away without paying for what she did. The legal process was already in motion. My lawyer had filed the necessary paperwork for a civil lawsuit against Karen, citing unlawful seizure of property, damages to my boat, and the financial burden of retrieving it from impound. But that wasn't the only legal trouble she was facing. The police had also opened an investigation into her actions, particularly whether she had the legal right to order the boat towed in the first place. If found guilty, she could be charged with unauthorized property removal or, depending on the extent of the damage, even theft. But the legal trouble didn't stop with Karen. The HOA itself was also under scrutiny. My case had uncovered deeper issues within the organization: years of mismanagement, arbitrary fines, and selective enforcement of rules. With Karen out, the remaining board members were scrambling to cover themselves, but it was too late. Homeowners had already started organizing, demanding an audit of HOA finances and policies. I had triggered something bigger than just a personal victory. I had ignited a full-blown movement to take back control from an HOA that had long since overstepped its bounds. As my case moved forward, Karen began to realize that she was in serious trouble. She had always wielded power through intimidation, but now that she was just another homeowner, she had no authority to hide behind. And without the HOA backing her, she was vulnerable. Her first move was an attempt to settle things quietly. She had her lawyer reach out to mine, offering to cover some of the impound fees if I agreed to drop the case. My response? A firm number. This wasn't just about the money, it was about accountability. She had taken something that wasn't hers, damaged it, and then tried to act like she had the authority to do so. If I had let her get away with it, she would have learned nothing. That's when Karen tried to play the victim. She started spreading rumors around the neighborhood, telling people I was overreacting, that I was milking the situation for personal gain. She even tried to paint herself as a concerned citizen who was just trying to keep the community beautiful. But no one was buying it. Too many homeowners had their own stories about Karen's abuses, and now that she was exposed, her credibility was shot. Even the remaining HOA board members, desperate to salvage their own reputations, refused to support her. She was completely on her own. As depositions for the civil case began, the evidence against Karen piled up fast. My security footage clearly showed her directing the tow truck in the middle of the night. The impound lot confirmed that she had personally signed the order. The HOA bylaws, which I had studied inside and out, made it clear that she had no legal authority to do any of this. My lawyer was confident. "This is an open and shut case," he told me. "She's got no legal standing to justify what she did." And he was right. A few months later, we finally had our day in court. Karen walked in looking defeated, dressed in an outfit that screamed, "I'm the real victim here." But as soon as the judge started going over the evidence, it was clear she didn't stand a chance. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was acting in the best interests of the community, but the judge wasn't buying it. He pointed out that she had failed to issue any notice, had no legal authority to remove my property, and had caused damages in the process. The final ruling? Karen was found liable for the illegal removal of my boat and ordered to cover all impound fees, pay for repairs to the damage she caused, and compensate me for legal expenses. It was a complete victory, but it got even worse for Karen. The police investigation had concluded, and while she wasn't charged with theft, she was hit with an official citation for unauthorized property removal. It wasn't a felony, but it was enough to go on her record. She would have to pay fines and complete a court-mandated property law course, an ironic punishment for someone who thought she knew everything about enforcing HOA rules. After the court ruling, Karen's life in the neighborhood became unbearable. She had spent years bullying people into submission, but now no one respected her. The very people she had lorded power over were now openly mocking her. She had no allies left. The final nail in the coffin came when the HOA board, desperate to distance themselves from her mess, voted to enact a series of new rules limiting the power of any single board member. One of the key new policies? No property could be towed without a majority vote from the board and advance written notice to the owner. It was a direct response to Karen's abuse of power, and everyone knew it. With no power, no reputation, and now a financial judgment against her, Karen made the only move she had left. She put her house on the market and announced she was leaving the neighborhood. No one was sad to see her go. In the end, Karen lost everything. She had spent years terrorizing the community, convinced that she was untouchable. But all it took was one bad decision, one act of arrogance, to bring it all crashing down. I got my boat back. I got justice. And best of all, I got to watch as the woman who had made so many lives miserable was finally held accountable for her actions. But as satisfying as my victory was, it wasn't just about me. My case had set a precedent. It had shown people that they didn't have to accept HOA overreach as an unavoidable reality. They could fight back, and they could win. By the time Karen's house sold and she left for good, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, freer. People no longer feared their HOA. They questioned it, challenged it, and held it accountable. And that, to me, was the greatest victory of all. With Karen gone, the neighborhood finally felt like it could breathe again. Her departure wasn't just a relief, it was a turning point. For years, she had ruled through intimidation, weaponizing the HOA against homeowners and twisting vague rules to serve her own interests. But her downfall wasn't just about one bad decision. It was about a community waking up to the reality that they had been bullied for far too long. Even after she packed up and left, her shadow lingered over the HOA. The legal battle had shaken the entire structure of the organization, and the board was forced to reckon with how easily Karen had abused her power. The lawsuits, police investigation, and public humiliation had made it clear that the old way of doing things wasn't going to cut it anymore. In the weeks after her departure, a growing number of homeowners pushed for changes, real changes, to ensure that no one like Karen could ever rise to power again. And I made it my mission to see those changes through. It started with a simple question: who was actually benefiting from the HOA? The board had long operated in secrecy, making decisions without consulting homeowners and enforcing vague rules whenever they saw fit. But now, with the community emboldened by Karen's downfall, people were demanding transparency. The first major reform came when homeowners successfully petitioned for mandatory open meetings. In the past, HOA meetings had been closed-door affairs where board members made decisions behind the scenes, only informing residents after the fact. Now every meeting was open to the community, and any new rule proposals had to be presented and voted on with public input. Next came the audit. Once Karen was gone, some of the board members had tried to pretend that they were simply following orders and had nothing to do with her abuses, but people weren't buying it. If the HOA had been so quick to enable Karen, what else had they been hiding? A group of homeowners, myself included, formally requested a financial audit of the HOA's budget and spending over the past several years. At first, the board resisted, claiming that everything was accounted for. But when the pressure mounted and legal threats were hinted at, they caved. The results were damning. The audit revealed that under Karen's leadership, thousands of dollars in HOA funds had been funneled into questionable expenses, ranging from unnecessary aesthetic improvement projects to legal fees used to fight homeowners over bogus violations. Even worse, there were payments to a private towing company, one that had been involved in removing my boat. It turned out that Karen had been working with them for years, cutting deals to have vehicles towed under the guise of neighborhood compliance. In some cases, those cars had belonged to people who had simply parked on their own property. Others had been removed because they had expired registration stickers, even though the HOA had no authority to enforce state vehicle laws. The outrage was immediate. Homeowners who had once been afraid to speak out now demanded answers. More than a few people started wondering whether Karen had been getting kickbacks from the towing company, a suspicion that, while unproven, became impossible to ignore. Faced with a scandal that threatened to unravel the entire HOA, the remaining board members had no choice but to agree to sweeping reforms. One of the biggest victories came when the community voted to amend the HOA bylaws. Under the new rules, no single board member could authorize a fine, tow, or removal of property without a formal review process. Any enforcement action had to be approved by a majority vote and come with proper documentation, including written warnings and homeowner appeals. The new rules also place strict limits on HOA spending. No more backroom deals, no more questionable expenses. Every financial decision had to be publicly recorded and available for homeowners to review, but the most significant change came when the board itself was completely replaced. In a historic vote, the entire remaining HOA leadership was removed, and new elections were held to bring in fresh faces, people who actually cared about the community instead of their own power trips. For the first time in years, the HOA was run by homeowners, not self-important bureaucrats. As the months passed, the changes became more and more noticeable. Homeowners who had once lived in fear of arbitrary fines now felt free to make reasonable improvements to their properties without harassment. People started using their driveways again without worrying that their cars would mysteriously disappear overnight. And perhaps most importantly, neighbors began talking to each other more, working together to make decisions instead of being ruled over by a select few. Even my case against Karen had long-term effects. Her legal troubles followed her even after she moved away. The financial judgment against her meant that she was on the hook for the damages to my boat and the legal fees. I later learned that she tried to appeal the ruling, but the court quickly shut it down. The evidence was too overwhelming. Rumor had it that she had moved to another HOA-controlled community in a different state, but something told me she wouldn't be nearly as bold this time around. She had learned the hard way that abusing power came with consequences. As for me, I didn't just walk away after my victory. I stayed involved in the HOA, not because I wanted power, but because I wanted to make sure that no one like Karen could ever come back. I helped draft new policies, attended meetings, and worked with other homeowners to keep the board in check. And the best part? I never had to deal with my boat being stolen again. Looking back, it was incredible how much had changed because of one person's arrogance. Karen had believed she was untouchable, that she could make up rules and enforce them as she pleased, but in the end, she had underestimated the very people she had spent years controlling. Her downfall wasn't just about one stolen boat. It was about the breaking point of a community that had finally had enough. If there was one lesson to take from it all, it was this: HOAs exist to serve homeowners, not rule over them. The moment people stop questioning authority, the moment they accept unfair rules without pushing back, is the moment they become prisoners in their own homes. But when a community comes together, when they stand up, speak out, and hold their leaders accountable, real change happens. Karen had tried to take my property. Instead, she lost everything. And the neighborhood, it was finally free. Karen's downfall was more than just a personal victory, it was a wake-up call. HOAs can be useful when run properly, but they can also become breeding grounds for abuse when left unchecked. The key is transparency, accountability, and homeowner involvement. For anyone dealing with an overreaching HOA, the message is clear: know your rights, stay informed, and never let anyone, no matter how much power they think they have, walk all over you. Because when people stand together, even the most stubborn HOA tyrants can be brought down.